The scent of old paper and lemon polish used to cling to my mother's house, a smell that promised stability, continuity, a quiet kind of wealth measured in generations, not dollars. It was the smell of my childhood, of scraped knees patched up in the sunroom, of whispered secrets under thick duvets in rooms overlooking the manicured garden. It was the smell of belonging, of a place I thought was as much a part of me as my own skin. I spent 40 years breathing it in, 40 years of my life woven into the fabric of those walls, those heirlooms, that carefully constructed world. I wasn't just a daughter. I was the keeper of the flame, the one who remembered where the chipped teacup came from, the history behind the stern-faced portrait in the hall, the secret to keeping the azaleas blooming year after year. My brothers, Michael and David, they were the bright, shining lights, the ones who went off into the world, making their fortunes in loud, visible ways. I stayed. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who was always there. When father died, leaving mother adrift in a sea of grief and complicated finances, it was me who stepped in, me who managed the household, me who became her shadow, her comfort, her constant companion. I didn't resent it, not then. It felt like my purpose, my place. Michael would call on Sundays, a booming voice from a distant city, full of grand pronouncements about his latest deal. David would visit holidays, bringing expensive, impractical gifts, and a restless energy that filled the house for a day or two before he jetted off again. They were the eagles, soaring high. I was the robin, tending the nest, and I believed, truly believed, that the nest, when the time came, would be shared. Not equally, perhaps. They had their own empires, after all, built on their own terms. But there was the house, the investments father had, so carefully managed, the land just beyond the garden walls. It was substantial. It was our history, our legacy. And I, who had nurtured mother through her final years, who held her hand as she took her last breath in that very house, who knew every creak in the floorboards and every memory held within the walls, believed my share was secure. Michael and David didn't need it, not like I did. It wasn't about needing the money. It was about needing the continuation, the acknowledgement of my life's work, my devotion. It was about that smell, that belonging. How foolish that seems now. Looking back, how utterly naive. You live your life believing in fairness, in family bonds, in the quiet promises made not with words but with shared history, with presence. You believe that when you are the one who sacrifices, the one who cares, the one who is always there, that will count for something. It counts for nothing when greed walks in the door, wearing the familiar faces of your own blood. It counts for less than nothing. It counts for betrayal. The first inkling, the faintest chill that crept up my spine, was when Michael arrived the day after the funeral, not looking grief-stricken, but efficient. David arrived the day after that, radiating a forced solemnity that didn't quite mask the impatience in his eyes. They didn't want to reminisce. They wanted to talk specifics. The will. Mother's lawyer. Mr. Abernathy, a kind, stooped man who had handled our family's affairs for decades, seemed uncomfortable. He cleared his throat a lot. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the thick envelope. My brothers sat opposite me in the drawing room, the very room where we'd had countless Christmases, birthdays, where father had taught us all how to play chess by the fire. Michael was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the document. David was more casual, slouched back in his chair, a foot tapping softly. But his gaze was just as intense. I sat there, a lump forming in my throat, not from anticipation of inheritance, but from the raw, fresh grief that still felt like a physical weight on my chest. I wasn't prepared for the cold language of legalese, the stark finality of clauses and subclauses. I was prepared for shared memories, for quiet understanding, for family. Abernathy began to read, his voice a low murmur. He spoke of Michael's portion, a significant sum of money, specified investments. He spoke of David's portion, equally substantial, different assets, but similar value. My heart sank. A little, not because they received so much, but because he was going through the list, and my name hadn't been mentioned in connection with the house, with the bulk of the estate I had always assumed would be mine, at least in part. He continued, his voice droning on about charities, about distant cousins receiving small bequests. I waited for my name, for the mention of the house, for anything that acknowledged my 40 years of quiet devotion, my role as mother's caregiver, my expectation of continuity. Abernathy finished reading. He folded the document neatly. He looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes that I didn't understand then. Michael cleared his throat. David stopped tapping his foot. So Michael said, his voice unnaturally bright, "There it is. All clear." I stared at Abernathy. "But the house? The main estate?" I asked, my voice small, lost in the large room. Abernathy looked even more uncomfortable. He glanced at my brothers. Michael spoke up, his voice smooth, reasonable. "Oh yeah, the house. Mother, in her last years, you know her memory wasn't always sharp." My blood ran cold. She discussed it with us. She knew how much upkeep it is. Really, it's a burden. We agreed, given her explicit wishes and our capacities. David chimed in, picking up the thread, effortlessly. We decided the most practical thing. Michael will take the house. It makes sense. His family is larger. They can use the space, and frankly, running it properly requires resources. Resources. Bless your heart, sister, that you simply don't have. Not with your modest lifestyle. My modest lifestyle. 40 years of their mother's modest lifestyle. Enabled by my constant unpaid labor. Resources I supposedly didn't have, because my life had been spent caring for the very person whose estate they were now carving up. It was like a physical blow, a punch to the gut, that stole my breath. Abernathy intervened gently. Your mother's final will, signed 2 months before her passing, indeed leaves the house and the majority of the residual estate after specific bequests to Michael. There is a small annuity for you, a monthly stipend and a sum specified for your immediate needs and relocation. Relocation? They weren't just taking the house, they were kicking me out. The small annuity and the immediate needs, some were pittance compared to the value of the house, the land, the investments. It wasn't a share. It was a severance. A pat on the head for a loyal servant, dismissed when no longer needed. My vision blurred. I could feel the familiar smell of lemon polish and old paper turning sour, suffocating. Mother would never, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Michael leaned forward again, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. She was confused, sister. She relied on us to make the difficult decisions. She knew we would do what was best. Best for the estate. Best for everyone. Best for them. That's what they meant. Best for Michael, who wanted a grand family seat to solidify his image. Best for David, who wanted his share in liquid assets he could invest and multiply. And for me, best for me was a few crumbs from the table, enough to ensure I wasn't their immediate responsibility, but not enough to challenge them, not enough to have the kind of security that came with a legacy, with belonging. The betrayal wasn't just the theft of assets. It was the theft of my history, my identity, my future as I had envisioned it. It was the cold, hard truth that my decades of love and care were viewed not as devotion but as a transaction, one for which I was now being given a meager payout. It was the dawning, sickening realization that they had planned this, orchestrated this, perhaps for years. The subtle shifts in Mother's opinion they might have engineered, the moments of confusion they might have leveraged, the isolation they might have encouraged. They were not just beneficiaries, they were architects of my dispossession. The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Walking through the house that was no longer mine, felt like trespassing. Every object, every painting, every piece of furniture felt alien, mocking. Michael arrived with his wife Claire, and their 3 children, a whirlwind of boisterous energy that felt sacrilegious in the quiet halls. Claire, all superficial smiles and passive-aggressive politeness, immediately started talking about renovations, about changing the curtains, about turning Mother's study into a playroom. "Of course, we'll need you out quickly," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The contractors are ready to start. It's a big job, getting this old place up to code, modernizing it. You understand?" Understand? I understood that they couldn't wait to erase me, to erase the last vestiges of Mother's life and mine from the walls. David called, not to offer comfort, but to ensure I was making arrangements to leave. "Found a nice little apartment yet?" he asked, his tone suggesting I should be grateful for the opportunity to downsize my life into a shoebox. "That stipend should cover a decent place, provided you're sensible." Sensible. Their definition of sensible was accepting my fate, disappearing quietly. The small sum allocated for my relocation felt insulting. It would barely cover first and last month's rent, and the cost of moving the few possessions I could take, the bulk of my things, the furniture, the books, the lifetime of accumulated objects, were suddenly a burden, unwelcome in their newly claimed territory. I remember standing in the drawing room one evening, after they'd left, the silence amplifying the emptiness. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7, a sound that had punctuated my life since childhood. Now it felt like a countdown. I looked at the portrait of my parents above the fireplace, their faces serene, unknowing of the storm their legacy had unleashed. Did they know? Had Mother, in a moment of clouded judgment, truly intended this? Or had she been guided, manipulated? The thought was a fresh stab of pain. How could her own sons do this? How could my brothers systematically dismantle the life I had built around caring for her, around preserving the family home, and offer me so little in return? I wasn't just losing a house. I was losing my sense of purpose, my identity, my place in the world. I was the caregiver, the homekeeper, the quiet anchor. Without the home, who was I? The feeling of powerlessness was suffocating. I had no legal recourse. Abernathy had made that clear. The will was valid, properly executed. Challenging it would be expensive, emotionally draining, and likely futile. They had covered their tracks, leveraged their influence, perhaps whispered insidious suggestions into Mother's ear when she was most vulnerable. The money they had given me, the immediate needs sum, felt like a bribe for my silence, for my swift, compliant departure. It was enough to keep me from being destitute on their doorstep, but not enough to fight them, not enough to build anything substantial. It was designed to keep me small, dependent on that meager monthly stipend. I was adrift, cut loose from the moorings of the life I had known, cast out with nothing but a pittance and the clothes on my back. It felt like the house, my symbolic object of stability and belonging, was now a monument to my betrayal. I walked through the rooms, touching the cold surfaces, remembering the height marks on the kitchen doorframe, showing how we'd grown. The stain on the library carpet from a spilled glass of wine during a long-ago party. The faint scent of Mother's perfume that still lingered in her bedroom. It was all being ripped away. Michael and David didn't see memories. They saw square footage, market value potential for modernization. They saw an asset to be leveraged, not a home steeped in history. Their wives saw a canvas for their own tastes, a backdrop for their own families' lives. There was no room for me, the quiet robin, in their eagle's nest. The physical act of packing was agonizing, deciding what few things I could take, what treasures I had to leave behind. Father's old globe, a childhood fascination, Mother's collection of pressed flowers, the antique writing desk where she composed all her letters. These weren't just objects, they were tangible links to my past, to the people I had loved, to the life that was now being erased. I saw them being catalogued by an appraiser Michael had hired, their value noted with cold professional detachment. I overheard Claire discussing selling some of the dated pieces. My heart ached with a physical pain. This wasn't just losing possessions, it was losing pieces of my soul, pieces of my family's story entrusted to my care, now being scattered or discarded. I felt a profound sense of failure. Had I not been enough? Had my devotion been invisible? Had my quiet strength been mistaken for weakness? Had my willingness to stay and care been seen as a lack of ambition, making me unworthy of a true share? These questions haunted me, whispering insidious doubts in the dead of night. The betrayal wasn't just external, it began to feel internal, a wound festering in my sense of self-worth. They had not only stolen my inheritance, they had tried to steal my belief in myself. Leaving the house was like tearing off a limb. I remember standing on the pavement, watching the taxi pull away, the familiar facade receding until it was just another house on the street. The smell of lemon polish and old paper was replaced by the exhaust fumes of city traffic. My new sensible apartment was small, sterile, and anonymous. It had none of the character, none of the history, none of the life of the house. It was just 4 walls and a roof. The few boxes I had brought contained a fraction of my belongings, a meager distillation of a lifetime. Unpacking felt pointless. I sat surrounded by the cardboard boxes, the silence pressing in on me. The small annuity arrived like clockwork, a constant reminder of my reduced circumstances, my dependence on their carefully calculated generosity. It wasn't enough to live on comfortably, certainly not enough to ever dream of buying a place of my own again, let alone building anything resembling the life I had lost. It was designed to keep me afloat, but only just to keep me grateful, or perhaps resigned. For a while, resignation felt like the only option. The grief for my mother was still raw, overlaid now with the bitter grief of betrayal. I felt adrift, purposeless. My days stretched out, empty and formless. The tasks that had defined my life, managing the household, caring for mother, tending the garden, were gone. I was like a bird whose nest had been destroyed, with nowhere to land. Michael and David didn't call, not once. After I had moved out, it was as if I had ceased to exist for them. A problem neatly solved, a loose end tied up. Claire sent a perfunctory email about needing a forwarding address for some final paperwork, the tone cool and dismissive. I saw photos surface on social media, photos of Michael's family enjoying the house, renovated and redecorated to their taste. The drawing room, stripped of its old charm, repainted in stark modern colors. The garden, redesigned with harsh geometric lines. It was like watching someone systematically dismantle your memories, piece by piece. Each photo was a fresh sting, a reminder of what had been so callously taken. It wasn't just the money, the value of the property, it was the violation of trust, the shattering of the most fundamental bond, family. How could people who shared my blood treat me this way? Had I been blind? Had the signs been there all along? Subtle manipulations I had dismissed, casual cruelties I had excused. Looking back, I saw them now, moments of dismissiveness, of treating me as less capable, less significant. My quiet nature, my focus on home and family, had been misinterpreted as weakness, as a lack of ambition that made me an easy target. They saw me as someone who wouldn't fight back, who would quietly accept the crumbs they offered. And for a time, they were right. The weight of grief and betrayal was crushing. I felt diminished, invisible. The small apartment felt like a cage, a physical manifestation of the limits they had placed on my life. The future seemed bleak, a slow decline into obscurity. Was this it? Was this to be my legacy? A life of quiet service, ending in quiet dispossession? The thought was unbearable. It settled in my gut, cold and heavy, but something shifted. Slowly, subtly, like the first tentative green shoot pushing through frozen ground. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a simmering anger. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger that dissipates quickly. It was a cold, hard fury, settling deep in my bones. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle, the injustice, the sheer audacious cruelty of it all. They hadn't just taken my inheritance. They had tried to take my spirit. And that I realized with a surge of fierce, protective energy I would not allow. I remembered something Father used to say, usually when teaching me a new skill in his workshop, how to mend a broken chair or restore a faded picture frame. Measure twice, cut once, he'd say. But if the cut is wrong, you don't discard the wood, you find a new way to use it, a new design where the flaw becomes a feature. They thought they had cut me out of the picture entirely. They were wrong. I might not have the wood they had taken, the familiar, comfortable grain of my past, but I had the scraps they'd left me, and I had something they seemed to have forgotten I possessed: decades of quiet observation, of managing complex household logistics, of nurturing things until they grew, of problem solving with limited resources. My life hadn't been defined by grand gestures or boardrooms, but it had been defined by competence, by resilience, by a quiet strength born of necessity. The small annuity, the immediate needs, they were meant to limit me, to keep me small. But what if I didn't see them as limitations? What if I saw them as capital? Small capital, yes, but capital nonetheless. It wasn't enough to buy a house. Certainly not that house. It wasn't enough to live a life of leisure. But was it enough to start something? A tiny spark of an idea flickered to life. What had I been good at? What had filled my days, given me purpose in the years spent caring for Mother in the house? I had been a meticulous organizer, a skilled manager of domestic complexity. I had an eye for detail, a knack for creating order out of chaos. I had helped friends and neighbors organize their homes, declutter their lives, manage their small personal estates after a death or a move. It was a quiet skill, an invisible labor, but it was a skill nonetheless. Could that be something? The anger solidified into resolve. They wanted me to disappear, to fade into the background, living a small, diminished life dependent on their scraps. I would not give them that satisfaction. I would build something they could not touch, something that was mine, entirely mine. The idea felt fragile at first, almost absurd. Me starting a business? I who had never worked outside the home in a traditional sense. But the cold fury was a powerful fuel. It burned away the self-doubt, the fear, the lingering grief. It left behind a hard kernel of determination. I would take the life they had tried to steal and build a new one. Not in the shadow of their wealth, but entirely separate, entirely my own. The small apartment no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a launching pad. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the quiet hum of nascent plans. I started researching, reading books, poring over websites late into the night. How did one start a small business? What were the steps? It was daunting, overwhelming. But each piece of information I absorbed felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of agency. I was no longer the woman waiting for crumbs. I was a woman forging a path. The image of Michael and David comfortable in the house they had taken, the house they were stripping of its history, fueled my resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea. The quiet robin, it turned out, had wings. The first steps were tentative, almost fearful. I used a portion of the immediate needs money, the money they thought would cover little more than rent and utilities, to buy a cheap laptop and set up a basic website. I called it Order and Grace. Order for the practical service I intended to offer. Grace for the quiet strength and empathy I hoped to bring to people navigating difficult transitions. My initial marketing was word of mouth. I reached out to a few neighbors I trusted, people who knew my history, who had seen my capabilities. They were supportive, offering encouragement, and, crucially, my first few clients. My services were simple: helping people organize their homes, downsize before a move, manage the practicalities of an estate after a death. These were tasks I had done for years, invisibly, within my own family and circle. Now I was charging for them. It felt strange at first, putting a monetary value on skills I had always given freely. But this was different. This wasn't about service anymore. It was about survival, about building, The work was hard, physically and emotionally draining. I spent hours sorting through people's lifetimes of accumulated possessions, navigating their attachments and their grief. It required patience, discretion, and a deep well of empathy. These were qualities my brothers seemed to lack entirely. While they were busy renovating the house, stripping away layers of history, I was helping others honor theirs, carefully packing away memories, finding new homes for cherished objects. There was an irony in it, a bitter one, that I was helping strangers preserve their legacies, while my own had been so carelessly discarded by my own family. The small annuity helped cover my basic living expenses, but every penny I earned from order and grace went back into the business. Flyers printed at the local copy shop, online advertising, better organizational tools. There were days when I felt completely overwhelmed, when the memory of the house, of the life I had lost, would wash over me, threatening to drown me in despair. The contrast between my quiet struggle and their seemingly effortless continuation of life in the place that should have been partly mine was a constant ache. I saw Michael featured in a business magazine, touting his latest success. I heard through mutual acquaintances about David's extravagant holidays. They were living large, on the back of what they had taken, while I was counting pennies, building something painstakingly, piece by piece. But the work also offered a strange kind of therapy. Bringing order to other people's chaos helped me manage my own internal turmoil. Each successful job, each grateful client, was a small affirmation of my worth, my competence, something they had tried to strip away. I learned to navigate the complexities of probate, to work with auction houses, to find resources for people who needed help. I was constantly learning, adapting, growing. My quiet observation skills, honed over years of watching and listening, proved invaluable. I could quickly assess a situation, understand a client's needs, and develop a plan. I was good at this. Really good. The realization settled in me, a quiet confidence. I wasn't just surviving, I was building something real. Word spread. My reputation grew not through flashy marketing, but through quiet competence and genuine care. Clients referred me to their friends, their families. The phone started ringing more often. I moved from using a public library computer to afford a slightly better laptop than a small office space outside my apartment. I hired my first employee, a kind, efficient woman named Sarah, who was looking for flexible work. The business was growing, slowly but steadily. It wasn't an empire yet, not in the way my brothers understood the word, measured in billions and global reach. But it was my empire, built on integrity, hard work, and a skill set they had never valued. It was built on the foundation of the life they thought was worthless. One afternoon, I was working at a client's house, sorting through old photographs, when I saw a familiar face smiling out at me from a faded picture. It was a photo of Mother, taken years ago, standing in the garden of the house. A pang of grief, sharp and unexpected, hit me. The client, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, saw where I was looking. "Oh yes," she said softly. "Your mother was a lovely woman, and your father a good man. Such a shame. What happened with the estate?" We all heard. She looked at me with open sympathy. The neighborhood, the one where I had grown up, where the house stood, was a close-knit community. My brother's actions hadn't gone unnoticed or uncommented upon. Their quick, clinical dispossession of me had been observed, judged. Mrs. Peterson leaned in. "You know," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "Michael isn't doing well with the garden. Doesn't have the touch your mother did. Or you. The azaleas are wilting, and I heard they're having trouble with the roof. Needs major work, apparently. More than they anticipated." A small, dark seed of something settled in my chest. Not pleasure, not exactly, but a sense of cosmic balance. They had taken something they didn't truly understand, something they couldn't nurture in the way it needed. They had seen it only as an asset, not a living thing. The house, my symbolic object, was perhaps reflecting their careless stewardship. My own empire, meanwhile, was thriving, precisely because I understood what it meant to nurture, to care for details, to build on a foundation of trust and relationship. The first contact from Michael came years later. Not a call, but a formal letter from his lawyer. It was polite, cool, referencing recent difficulties, and inquiring if Miss Eleanor Vance would be amenable to discussing a potential mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the property known as Meadowood. Meadowood. They were finally calling the house by its name, not just the property. I reread the letter, a strange mixture of tension and disbelief tightening my chest. Mutually beneficial arrangement? After all this time? After they had stolen it? After they had dismissed me? My business, Order and Grace, was now well established. I had a small team, a growing client list, and a solid reputation. I wasn't wealthy in Michael's terms, but I was secure, independent, and comfortable. My modest lifestyle was now one of quiet prosperity, built on my own terms. I didn't respond immediately. I held the letter, feeling the weight of it, the years of hurt and struggle it represented. It felt like a test, a lure. What did they want? Had their difficulties with the house, the wilting garden, the leaky roof, Mrs. Peterson mentioned, become insurmountable? Had the asset they had, so greedily seized, turned into a liability? The irony was almost too much to bear. They had wanted the status symbol, the grand house, but they hadn't understood the work it required, the constant care, the love it demanded. They had only seen the price tag. I consulted a lawyer, not Mr. Abernathy, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Anya Sharma. I laid out the history, the betrayal, the years of silence. She listened, her expression unreadable. They want something, she stated simply, likely to divest themselves of the property, or perhaps they require access to funds tied up in it, and are exploring options, including a potential sale. A sale. The thought felt unreal. Selling Meadowood? The house that was meant to stay in the family for generations? The house they had taken from me, under the guise of preserving Mother's legacy and ensuring it was properly cared for. The potential for an inversion of the power dynamic was palpable. They had held all the cards, the wealth, the legal documents, the familial power. Now perhaps I held a different kind of power. The power of independence, of not needing them, of having built my own security outside their system. I instructed Ms. Sharma to respond, not with eagerness, but with cautious inquiry. I wanted to understand their position fully. Before revealing anything about my own, I wanted to see them squirm, just a little. It wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my agency. It was about showing them that the quiet woman they had dismissed wasn't so quiet anymore. The wait for their response was tense. I found myself thinking about the house constantly, remembering its rooms, its gardens, its smell. Did I want it back? Could I ever truly feel at home there again, knowing the history of its transfer? It was a complex emotional tangle. Part of me yearned for the familiar comfort, the sense of belonging. Another part felt repelled by the memory of the betrayal, the taint that now clung to the old walls. What I wanted, more than the house itself, was acknowledgement, an admission, however implicit, of the wrong that had been done. But I knew that was unlikely to come from Michael or David. Their pride, their carefully constructed narratives of justification, would never allow it. Whatever arrangement they proposed, it would be on their terms, couched in the language of practicality and mutual benefit, never admitting their past actions. The proposal came through Miss Sharma. Michael, it turned out, was facing significant financial difficulties in his primary business venture. He needed to liquidate assets quickly, and Meadowood, despite its problems, was his most valuable one. He was offering to sell it to me at a price slightly below market value, citing the family connection as a factor, though the tone of the letter made it clear it was a pragmatic decision born of necessity, not sentiment. He also mentioned David's agreement, indicating they were likely both feeling the pinch from whatever investments or ventures hadn't panned out as planned. The sum they were asking was still substantial, far more than the meager portion of the estate I had received years ago. But thanks to the success of Order and Grace, it wasn't an impossible sum. It would require leveraging everything I had built, taking out a significant mortgage, but it was within reach. It was a moment of profound irony. The house that had been stolen from me, denying me my expected inheritance, was now potentially within my grasp, because I had used the scraps they left me to build something else, something stronger. My empire, built from scratch, was giving me the means to reclaim a piece of the past they had tried to erase. I sat with Miss Sharma, reviewing the proposal. "It's poetic, isn't it?" I said, a wry smile touching my lips. She raised an eyebrow. "It is a business transaction, Miss Vance. Keep emotion out of it." Easy for her to say. For me, it was steeped in emotion. It was the culmination of years of pain, struggle, and quiet triumph. But I understood her point. This couldn't be about sentimentality. It had to be a sound decision. We discussed the state of the house, the known issues, the potential costs of renovation. We discussed the mortgage, the financial implications for Order and Grace. It was a risk, a significant one. But the alternative, letting Meadowood fall into the hands of strangers, seeing my family's history disappear completely, felt equally unbearable. And there was the undeniable satisfaction, the quiet, deep-seated triumph in the idea of taking back what had been stolen, not through confrontation or legal battles, but through my own hard-won success. I asked Miss Sharma to make a counteroffer, slightly lower than their asking price, citing the required repairs and the current market conditions, keeping the tone strictly professional. I wasn't going to appear desperate or overly sentimental. This was business. Their business had failed them. Mine had not. I wanted them to feel the inversion of power, to understand that I was coming to the table not as the dispossessed sister, but as a capable businesswoman. The negotiation was brief. They accepted my counteroffer, clearly under pressure. The relief in Michael's subsequent letter, mediated by lawyers, was almost palpable, even in its formal language. He needed this sale. He needed me. It felt like a full circle, a strange, unexpected twist of fate. The house, the symbolic heart of the inheritance they had denied me, was returning to me, not as a gift, but as a purchase, a testament to the resilience and strength they had failed to anticipate. My quiet life, my undervalued skills, had built the very bridge that led me back to the place they thought I would never return to. The day I signed the papers to buy Meadowood was surreal. Sitting across the table from Michael and David's lawyer, the same office where Mr. Abernethy had read Mother's will years ago, felt like stepping into a different dimension. I wasn't the grieving, vulnerable woman I had been then. I was poised, professional, accompanied by my own sharp legal counsel. Michael and David weren't there, of course. They sent their representative, a clear indication that they still couldn't face me, couldn't acknowledge the woman I had become. It was perhaps for the best. I wasn't sure I could have contained the complex emotions their presence would have stirred. The lingering hurt, the quiet satisfaction, the bittersweet ache of a family irreparably broken. Signing my name on the dotted line felt heavy, final. It was the weight of a massive financial commitment, yes, but also the weight of history, of memory, of vindication. The house was mine, again, not through inheritance, but through purchase, through hard work, through resilience, through building something from the ground up. The key felt heavy in my hand as I stood on the doorstep of Meadowood for the first time as its owner. The smell was different now, faintly musty, a hint of neglect. The lemon polish scent was gone. The garden, as Mrs. Peterson had noted, was overgrown, the azaleas struggling. Inside, the changes they had made felt jarring. The stark paint, the modern furniture that looked out of place, the lack of personal touch. It wasn't the home I had left. It was a shell, a stage set for a life that hadn't truly taken root here. They had taken the house, but they hadn't been able to make it theirs in the way Mother or I had. They hadn't poured love and care into its bones. They had simply occupied it, leveraged it. Walking through the rooms, it wasn't just memories that surfaced, but a clear-eyed assessment of the work needed. This wasn't just reclaiming a past, it was building a future. It was about restoring not just a house, but a feeling, a sense of continuity that had been severed. The empire I had built, order and grace, was the means to this restoration. My skills, honed through helping others organize and rebuild their lives, were now focused on my own. I began the process slowly, meticulously, clearing out the modern furnishings, stripping away the jarring paint. It wasn't about recreating the past exactly, but about honoring it while making the house my own, truly mine this time. My team from Order and Grace helped, their efficient, empathetic presence filling the empty rooms with energy and purpose. They knew my story, or parts of it, enough to understand the significance of this project. It was more than just a job. It was a shared endeavor, a reclaiming. I started with the garden, digging my hands into the soil, feeling the connection to the earth, to Mother's legacy of nurturing living things. It was hard work, therapeutic in its physicality. As the garden began to respond, the colors returning, the scents filling the air, it felt like healing was taking root within me too. The house gradually began to breathe again. The smell of old paper and polish returned, faint at first, then stronger. As I carefully cleaned and restored, I brought back some of the pieces I had been forced to leave behind, buying them back from antique dealers Michael had sold them to. It was another small victory, a retrieval of lost fragments. Michael and David didn't contact me again after the sale was complete. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of hurt. I didn't expect one. Their silence was its own kind of communication. A final admission, perhaps, that they had overplayed their hand, that their grab for wealth had ultimately led them to sell back to the very person they had wronged. They had wanted the inheritance, but they had lost something far more valuable: their connection to family, to history, to integrity. My empire wasn't built on inheriting wealth. It was built on losing it, on being forced to find my own strength, my own resources. It was built on betrayal, yes, but also on resilience, on quiet determination, on the refusal to be defined by someone else's actions. Living in the house again felt different. It was familiar, yes. Every corner held a memory. Every floorboard creaked in a way I remembered, but it was also new. It was mine, unequivocally. The mortgage was a constant weight, a reminder that this was earned, not given. The renovations were ongoing, a labor of love and a necessity. Meadowood wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of what had been lost, what had been stolen, and what had been reclaimed through sheer force of will. My days were full, running Order and Grace, which continued to thrive, and overseeing the restoration of Meadowood. There was a rhythm to my life now, a purpose that went beyond caring for others. It was about building and preserving something for myself, something that reflected my own values.
I didn't seek out my brothers.
There was nothing left to say. The chasm between us was too wide, dug by their choices, cemented by their silence. The bitterness lingered, a faint aftertaste to the sweetness of my hard-won independence, but it no longer consumed me. It was a scar, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. I thought about Mother often. I wondered if she knew, somehow, what had transpired. If she would have approved of my path, of the strength I had found. I hoped she would have seen the resilience, the refusal to be broken, as a reflection of the quiet determination she herself possessed. The community watched. I knew they saw the lights on at Meadowood, the garden slowly coming back to life. They saw me, the quiet woman who had been cast out, not just surviving but flourishing. There was a quiet respect in their eyes that was worth more than any inheritance. I was no longer defined by the betrayal, but by my response to it. I wasn't the woman who had lost everything. I was the woman who had built everything anew. The past was a part of me, the hurt woven into my story, but it was not the whole story. The scent of polish, the creak of the stairs, the view from the drawing room window, they were no longer tinged solely with loss. They were imbued with the scent of my own effort, the sound of my own footsteps, the view of a future I was creating, day by day. This wasn't the empire Michael or David understood, built on abstract numbers and power plays. Mine was built on tangible things, on organizing chaos, on restoring beauty, on finding value in what others discarded, on the simple, undeniable strength of starting again, against all odds. It was built on the foundation of a broken heart, yes, but also on the unbreakable spirit they thought they could extinguish. They stole my inheritance, my legacy, my sense of belonging. In return, I found my own, and it was richer, more resilient, and entirely fiercely mine. The final chapter wasn't written by their actions, it was written by mine, and it was a chapter of quiet strength, of hard-won peace, and of an empire built not from gilded bricks, but from the ashes of betrayal. And it was glorious. The house settled around me, each restored room a testament to perseverance. The drawing room, its original paneling revealed and polished, felt warm and welcoming again. The garden, now lush and vibrant, hummed with bees and birds. I spent hours there, tending to the flowers Mother had loved, feeling a connection not just to her memory, but to the earth itself, a grounding I desperately needed after years of feeling adrift. Order and grace continued to grow. I hired more staff, expanded our services to include estate sales and property clearouts, often working with families navigating the same kind of difficult transitions I had experienced. My empathy wasn't just a personal trait, it was a business asset, a core part of our brand. My story wasn't public knowledge in the business world, but the quiet strength I exuded, the understanding I brought to often sensitive situations, resonated with clients. I was known for discretion, for efficiency, for handling things with grace, a name that felt more fitting with each passing year. Occasionally I would hear snippets of news about Michael and David through the grapevine, distant echoes of lives I no longer shared. Michael had apparently sold Meadowood just in time to avoid deeper financial troubles, though his business was still struggling. David had moved overseas, chasing some new venture. Their paths had diverged completely from mine. They had taken the easy route, the expected route of leveraging inherited wealth, and it seemed to have led them to uncertainty and restlessness. I had been forced onto a different path, a harder one, but it had led me to stability, purpose, and a profound sense of self-reliance. I was no longer the quiet sister in the background. I was the founder, the owner, the one in charge. The inversion of the power dynamic was complete, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of agency and fulfillment. They were chasing fleeting gains. I was rooted, building something lasting. I sometimes wondered if they ever thought about me, about the woman they had wronged. Did they feel guilt, regret, or had they successfully rationalized their actions, convinced themselves that I was better off, that they had done me a favor by forcing me out of my comfortable stagnation? I suspected the latter. People capable of such calculated betrayal rarely possess deep reservoirs of introspection or remorse. Their world was one of transactions, of winners and losers. In their eyes, they had won. I had lost. They failed to see that being stripped bare had forced me to build a different kind of wealth, an inner resilience that no amount of money could buy. The house itself felt like a silent partner in my journey. Its restoration mirrored my own. Each repaired wall, each replanted shrub, felt like a step towards wholeness. It was no longer just Mother's house. It was my house, bearing the imprint of my own efforts, my own taste, my own life lived within its walls. The symbolic object was transformed, no longer a painful reminder of loss, but a proud testament to recovery and rebuilding. I hosted small gatherings, friends, colleagues. The house was filled with laughter and conversation again, different voices than the ones I had grown up with, but warm and genuine. There was no pretense here, no underlying tension. It was a space of my own creation, filled with people who valued me for who I was, not for my connection to wealth or status. The bitterness I had felt for so long had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. What they had done was wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong, but their actions, intended to diminish me, had inadvertently set me free. Free from expectation, free from dependence, free to discover my own capabilities, my own strength. They had stolen an inheritance, but they had given me the opportunity to build an empire of resilience, of purpose, of a life authentically lived on my own terms. And that, I knew, was an inheritance no one could ever take away. As the years passed, Meadowood felt less like a reclaimed relic of the past and more like a vibrant center of my present and future. The gardens flourished under my care, a riot of color and life that Mother would have adored. I added a small greenhouse, indulging a passion I hadn't had the time or space for before. Order and grace continued its steady growth, allowing me to live comfortably and invest in the ongoing preservation of the house. It was a virtuous cycle, my work enabling me to care for my home, and my home providing a quiet sanctuary that fueled my work. The initial sting of betrayal had dulled, softening into a kind of weary acceptance. I still rarely heard from Michael or David. Brief, impersonal exchanges through lawyers if something unavoidable arose, but otherwise, silence. It was the price of what they had done, the irreversible fracture of family bonds. It was bittersweet, a quiet sadness that settled whenever I allowed myself to dwell on it. They had chosen wealth over connection, and they were living with the consequences, just as I was. But my consequences had led to growth, to independence, to a life far richer in meaning than the one I might have passively inherited. Theirs, it seemed, had led to continued striving, and perhaps a different kind of emptiness. I had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds, but in resilience, in purpose, in the strength of spirit. I had lost a house and gained an empire, not of concrete and steel, but of self-reliance and quiet power. The story of my inheritance wasn't one of loss. It was one of transformation. They had thought they were taking everything, leaving me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with the most valuable asset of all, myself, tested, refined, and unbreakable. The house stood, solid and serene, a monument to my journey. It was no longer a symbol of what was stolen, but of what was rebuilt, piece by painstaking piece, by the quiet woman they had underestimated. And in its enduring presence, I found a profound, settled peace. The scent of roses from the garden drifted through the open windows of the drawing room. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Meadowood felt alive, full of a quiet energy that was distinctly mine. It had taken years, not just to restore the house, but to fully inhabit the life I had built within its walls. The raw edges of betrayal had smoothed, the initial fury replaced by a quiet, settled strength. Order and grace was thriving, a testament to the value of empathy and organization in a chaotic world. I had built a team I trusted, created a business that helped people navigate difficult transitions, and found a deep satisfaction in the work itself. Michael and David were figures from a distant past, their actions a catalyst that had in a perverse way shaped me into the person I was meant to become. They had tried to confine me, to limit my possibilities, but their betrayal had thrown open doors I never knew existed. I had faced the worst, losing my family, my home, my perceived future, and I had survived. More than survived, I had built something lasting, something meaningful, entirely independent of them. The house, once a symbol of their theft, was now the heart of my quiet empire. It was a physical manifestation of my resilience, a place where the past was honored but did not dictate the future. I walked through the garden, touching the velvety petals of a rose, remembering Mother's hand guiding mine as a child. The continuity was here, not through inheritance, but through my own choice, my own effort. The legacy wasn't the property itself, but the strength I had found in reclaiming it, in rebuilding my life from the ashes. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with uncertainty. There had been moments of doubt, of despair, when the weight of what had been taken felt unbearable. But I had persevered, fueled by a quiet fire, a refusal to be defeated. The woman who had left this house years ago, heartbroken and dispossessed, was not the woman who now walked its halls, with quiet confidence. She was stronger, wiser, and fiercely independent. They had stolen my inheritance. Yes, But in doing so, they had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge of my own capacity, the proof that I could build my own world, brick by painstaking brick, from scratch. And that knowledge was an empire of its own, vast and unassailable.
The restoration of Meadowood was complete, at least the major parts. It felt whole again. Breathing. The gardens were a source of constant joy and quiet work. Inside, the rooms felt lived in, layered with my own history alongside the echoes of the past. I had incorporated some of my own finds from antique shops and estate sales, pieces that resonated with the house's original character, blending seamlessly with the items I had managed to reclaim or repurchase. It was a tapestry woven with threads of memory, loss, and renewal. Order and Grace was now a recognized name in the region, synonymous with compassionate efficiency. I had built a strong team, people who shared my values, and I was able to step back slightly from the day-to-day operations, focusing more on strategic planning and mentoring my staff. This allowed me more time at Meadowood, more time for the garden, more time for reflection. The quiet had always been a part of my nature, but now it felt like a chosen state, a space for contemplation rather than a consequence of being overlooked. I was no longer invisible. I was simply content with my own company, secure in the life I had built. Michael and David remained distant. I heard they were still facing challenges, their grand ventures proving less stable than they had perhaps anticipated. The kind of success I had built felt more grounded, more sustainable, perhaps because it was born of necessity and built on genuine connection and service, not just financial maneuvering. I sometimes wondered if they ever reflected on the path not taken, the family bonds they had severed for the sake of material gain. Did the house, the inheritance they had so desperately wanted, bring them the happiness or security they had envisioned? I doubted it. True security, I had learned, came from within, from knowing your own worth and your own capacity to create. My inheritance wasn't the house. It was the journey. It was the courage I found in the face of betrayal, the resilience I discovered in starting over, the quiet power I built one step at a time. Meadowood was the beautiful, tangible symbol of that journey, but the real empire was the life I had built, brick by brick on the foundation of my own strength. It was a life I cherished, a life that was entirely, proudly, and fiercely mine. And that was the greatest wealth of all. The scent of blooming jasmine filled the air as I walked the paths of the garden, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that settled deep into your bones. Meadowood stood quiet and grand against the twilight sky, a beacon of resilience. It was more than just a house. It was a living history, a testament to life's unexpected turns and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The betrayal felt like a distant echo now, a storm I had weathered and emerged from stronger and more rooted. The bitterness had faded completely, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude for the life I had been forced to create. The inheritance I had lost had paved the way for an empire built on my own terms, defined not by financial value, but by purpose, integrity, and independence. Order and Grace continued to flourish, a source of quiet pride and fulfillment. I had created something meaningful, something that helped others, using the very skills that had been overlooked and undervalued for so long. My team felt like family, bound by shared work and mutual respect. The house was filled with my life, my books, my art, the objects I had chosen, each piece holding a story. It was a home, not just a property. Michael and David were distant figures, their lives unfolding elsewhere. I bore them no ill will, only a quiet understanding of the paths they had chosen and the consequences they had faced. They had taught me a hard lesson, one that had ultimately set me free. They had shown me that true security doesn't lie in external possessions or familial promises, but in your own capacity to adapt, to create, to rebuild. Meadowood was a symbol of what I had overcome. It was the place where my story began, where it was almost broken, and where it was ultimately made whole again. It was a reminder that even in the face of devastating loss, it is possible to build something new, something beautiful,
something entirely your own. My empire wasn't carved out of inherited wealth. It was forged in the fires of betrayal and built with the strength of my own hands and heart. And it was the most valuable empire I could ever possess.